that's coming in fast.
Must be a big one.
The National Hurricane Center has issued hurricane surge warnings for this area.
Just pray.
It could be a Category 5.
That's what they always say, and then everything turns out to be fine.
Jesus Christ.
Go, go!
There's no people.
I am not gonna have him die. Here they come! Bet you never saw this on Shark Week.
Welcome back to CinePeak. Today, we're taking an in-depth look at Thrash, 2026, one of the most intense, emotionally charged, and highly anticipated films of the year. Combining powerful storytelling, unforgettable characters, and a gripping narrative filled with conflict, ambition, and personal struggle, Thrash delivers a cinematic experience that keeps audiences invested from its opening moments to its dramatic conclusion. The film explores themes of determination, identity, sacrifice, and the pursuit of dreams, presenting a compelling journey that resonates on both an emotional and human level. Supported by a talented cast, dynamic performances, impressive cinematography, and a carefully crafted atmosphere, Thrash has generated significant attention among movie fans and critics alike. Its blend of drama, tension, character development, and impactful storytelling creates a film that is both entertaining and thought-provoking. In this video, we'll break down everything you need to know about Thrash, 2026, including its story, cast, characters, production background, key themes, critical reception, and the elements that make it stand out among this year's releases. Whether you're already a fan of the film or simply curious to learn more about one of 2026's most talked about movies, stay tuned as CinePeak explores every aspect of the powerful and unforgettable world of Thrash. Thrash is a 2026 American survival thriller film written and directed by Tommy Wirkola, known for his distinctive approach to blending intense suspense, action, and horror elements. The film stars Phoebe Dynevor, Whitney, and Djimon Hounsou in leading roles, delivering performances that anchor a high-stakes story of survival against both natural and predatory threats. Set in a vulnerable coastal town, the narrative unfolds as a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane makes landfall, unleashing devastating winds, torrential rain, and unprecedented flooding. As the storm overwhelms the community and traps residents in submerged neighborhoods, an even deadlier danger emerges when ravenous sharks are swept inland by the floodwaters, turning the disaster into a terrifying fight for survival. Forced to navigate collapsing infrastructure, rising water levels, and relentless predators, the characters must rely on courage, ingenuity, and teamwork to stay alive amid the chaos. The project was produced by Tommy Wirkola alongside acclaimed filmmaker Adam McKay and producer Kevin Messick through Hyperobject Industries. Sony Pictures officially announced the film in May 2024, generating significant interest due to its unique combination of disaster thriller and creature feature elements. Principal photography began in July 2024 in Melbourne, Australia, where filmmakers utilized large-scale practical sets and visual effects to recreate the film's storm-ravaged environments. During its development, the movie underwent several title changes, including Beneath the Storm and Shiver, before ultimately settling on the title Thrash. Although originally intended for a theatrical release by Sony Pictures, the studio later transferred worldwide distribution rights to Netflix, shifting the project to a streaming-focused release strategy. Thrash premiered in the United States on April 10, 2026, introducing audiences to its adrenaline-fueled blend of disaster spectacle and shark-infested horror. Following its release, the film received mixed reviews from critics. While many praised its intense action sequences, suspenseful atmosphere, visual effects, and commitment to delivering large-scale thrills, others criticized aspects of its narrative execution and character development. Despite the divided critical reception, the film attracted attention from viewers who enjoyed its fast-paced survival story and its inventive fusion of natural disaster and shark horror genres, establishing Thrash as one of the more distinctive thriller releases of 2026. The story of Thrash takes place in the coastal town of Anneville, South Carolina, where residents anxiously prepare for the arrival of Hurricane Henry, a monstrous Category 5 storm predicted to be one of the most destructive hurricanes in the region's history. As emergency evacuation orders are issued and the town begins to empty, several individuals find themselves unable to escape the approaching disaster. Dakota, still grieving the recent death of her mother, remains alone in her childhood home. Suffering from severe agoraphobia, she is psychologically incapable of leaving the house despite the life-threatening danger closing in around her. Elsewhere in town, Lisa, who is heavily pregnant and nearing her due date, becomes stranded after failing to evacuate in time. Outside Anneville, siblings Dee, Ron, and Will are forced to seek shelter with their foster parents, Billy and Rachel, whose home is ill-equipped to withstand a storm of such magnitude. When Hurricane Henry finally makes landfall, it unleashes unimaginable destruction. Ferocious winds tear apart buildings, torrential rains overwhelm drainage systems, and a massive storm surge crashes into Anneville's coastal defenses. The town's seawall collapses under the immense pressure of the ocean, allowing floodwaters to rush into streets, homes, and businesses. Amid the chaos, a tanker truck carrying large quantities of animal blood is destroyed by the flooding, spilling its contents into the water. The scent attracts numerous sharks from the surrounding ocean, transforming the flooded town into a deadly hunting ground. As panic spreads, Dakota witnesses Lisa trapped inside her vehicle as rising waters threaten to engulf it. Overcoming her fears, Dakota ventures into the floodwaters and successfully rescues Lisa, bringing her back to the relative safety of her home. Meanwhile, Dakota's uncle Dale, a respected marine researcher, becomes increasingly concerned about her safety. Determined to rescue his niece, he joins forces with the television news crew that has been covering the hurricane. As they make their way toward Anneville, Dale discovers alarming evidence that a massive great white shark known as Nelia, an animal he and his team had previously tagged and monitored, is now moving through the flooded coastal region. With roads completely submerged and impassable, Dale and the news crew abandon conventional transportation and continue their journey by boat, navigating through the storm's dangerous waters in hopes of reaching Dakota before it is too late. At the Foster family's house, conditions rapidly deteriorate as floodwaters invade the lower levels of the building. Realizing they cannot remain inside forever, Billy and Rachel attempt to reach their specially equipped pickup truck parked outside. The vehicle contains snorkeling gear and supplies that could help them escape. However, as they wade through the murky floodwaters, they are suddenly attacked by aggressive bull sharks lurking beneath the surface. Rachel is killed during the attack, while Billy suffers severe injuries and barely manages to swim back into the house. Inside, tensions escalate when Billy attempts to convince Ron to risk his life retrieving supplies from the truck. The siblings soon uncover a disturbing secret. Billy has been stealing and pocketing the government welfare payments intended for their care. Furious and betrayed, Ron confronts Billy, leading to a violent struggle. During the altercation, Dee intervenes and kicks Billy back into the floodwaters, where he is immediately attacked and killed by one of the waiting sharks. With Billy gone, Ron seizes the opportunity to enter the flooded basement in search of anything that could help them survive. There, he discovers a hidden cache containing sticks of dynamite. Armed with the explosives, the siblings devise a desperate plan. They lure the sharks into the house and strategically detonate the dynamite, destroying both the predators and large portions of the building. Having eliminated the immediate threat, Dee, Ron, and will finally reach the pickup truck, start its engine, and escape the increasingly devastated area. Back in Anneville, The situation becomes even more perilous as floodwaters continue to rise. Dakota realizes that remaining inside her mother's house is no longer an option and ventures outside to retrieve a nearby rowboat. While she is away, the structural damage to the house becomes critical. As Dakota watches helplessly, the building begins to collapse into the floodwaters just as Lisa unexpectedly goes into labor. Trapped amid the destruction, Lisa endures a terrifying childbirth while surrounded by the storm. Against all odds, she successfully gives birth to a healthy baby while floating in the floodwaters. Dakota rushes to rescue the exhausted mother and her newborn child, but before she can reach safety, a shark attacks and overturns the rowboat, throwing everyone into the water. At the last possible moment, Dale and the news crew arrive aboard their rescue vessel. Dale courageously fights off multiple bull sharks surrounding the survivors and pulls Dakota, Lisa, and the newborn baby aboard a boat. During the final confrontation, Nellie, the enormous great white shark that Dale had previously tracked, appears and attacks the remaining bull shark, eliminating the last immediate threat. As the survivors sail away from the ruins of Neville, they look back at the once thriving town now reduced to devastation by the combined forces of nature and predators. However, the ordeal may not be over. In the film's closing moments, Dale's colleague Greg receives troubling meteorological data indicating that another powerful hurricane is already forming and heading toward the eastern coastline, hinting that an even greater disaster could still be on the horizon. The cast of Thrash is led by Phoebe Dynevor as Lisa, a heavily pregnant woman who becomes stranded in the coastal town of Neville when Hurricane Henry strikes. As the storm intensifies and floodwaters overtake the town, Lisa finds herself fighting for survival while preparing to give birth under unimaginable circumstances. Her character serves as one of the emotional centers of the film, embodying resilience, determination, and maternal courage in the face of overwhelming danger. Starring alongside her is Whitney Peak as Dakota, a young woman suffering from severe agoraphobia who remains trapped inside her late mother's home as the hurricane approaches. Dakota's personal journey is one of the film's most compelling storylines, as she must confront her deepest fears in order to survive and help others during the disaster. Academy Award-nominated actor Djimon Hounsou portrays Dr. Dale Edwards, Dakota's uncle and a respected marine researcher whose expertise becomes invaluable as sharks invade the flooded town. Determined to rescue his niece and protect the remaining survivors, Dale embarks on a dangerous mission through the storm while investigating the unusual shark activity surrounding Neville. Matt Nable appears as Billy Olsen, the foster father of siblings Dee, Ron, and Will. Billy initially presents himself as a caretaker but is later revealed to possess selfish and manipulative tendencies that create additional conflict among the survivors during the crisis. Amy Matthews plays Rachel Olsen, Billy's wife, who becomes one of the many victims of the deadly floodwaters and shark attacks unleashed by the hurricane. The younger cast members are led by Alila Brown as Dee, the brave and resourceful sister among a trio of foster siblings struggling to survive the disaster. Stacey Clausen portrays Ron, Dee's older brother, whose determination and leadership prove crucial when the siblings find themselves trapped and hunted by sharks. Dante Ubaldi plays Will, the youngest sibling, whose survival becomes a key motivation for both Dee and Ron throughout the film's most dangerous moments. The film's supporting cast includes Andrew Lees as Joe Sprinkle, a television reporter covering Hurricane Henry whose assignment unexpectedly places him in the middle of the catastrophe. Accompanying him is Samia Fooney as Doug, Joe's loyal cameraman, who documents the unfolding disaster while assisting in rescue efforts. Tyler Compton appears as Trent, while Adam Dunn portrays Greg Wilson, a local harbor master who helps monitor the hurricane and later uncovers alarming information about another storm threatening the coastline. Additional supporting performances come from Chai Hansen as Brian, Annabelle Mullion as Claire Fields, Bert Labonte Tilda Copyright as Jimmy, Son Luxford as Diane Rialto, and Josh McConville as Bob. Together, the ensemble cast brings to life a diverse group of characters whose intersecting stories of survival, sacrifice, courage, and desperation unfold against the backdrop of one of the most devastating natural disasters ever to strike Neville. The development of Thrash began in May 2024 when Sony Pictures officially announced a new survival thriller project titled Beneath the Storm. The film was revealed to be written and directed by Tommy Wirkola, the Norwegian filmmaker known for his work in action, horror, and thriller genres. From the outset, the project attracted attention for its unique premise, which combined the large-scale destruction of a natural disaster film with the intense suspense of a shark survival thriller. At the same time as the announcement, actress Phoebe Dynevor was confirmed as the film's lead star, taking on one of the central roles in the story. The project was developed as a high-concept thriller designed to blend emotional character drama with spectacular disaster sequences and creature feature elements, positioning it as one of Sony's most ambitious genre productions in development at the time. Production moved forward quickly, and principal photography officially commenced in July 2024 in Melbourne, Australia. The location was selected for its diverse filming environments, extensive studio facilities, and ability to accommodate the large-scale practical and visual effects work required to recreate a hurricane-ravaged coastal town. During the early stages of filming, additional casting announcements revealed that Whitney Peak and Academy Award-nominated actor Djimon Hounsou had joined the production in major roles. Their additions strengthened the ensemble cast and brought further attention to the project. Throughout filming, the production team faced the challenge of creating realistic flood sequences, storm destruction, and shark attacks, requiring a combination of practical effects, large water tanks, detailed set construction, and advanced visual effects techniques. Acclaimed cinematographer Matthew Weston served as director of photography, helping to craft the film's tense atmosphere and visually immersive depiction of a town overwhelmed by both nature and deadly predators. As the project progressed through post-production, the film underwent several significant changes. In March 2025, Sony Pictures announced that the title had been changed from Beneath the Storm to Shiver, reflecting a shift in the film's marketing strategy and emphasizing its horror-thriller elements. However, this would not be the final title change. As work on the film continued, the project entered another transitional period and, by January 2026, it was once again being referred to without an official title. Around the same time, a major business decision altered the film's release plans. Although originally developed as a theatrical release for Sony Pictures, the distribution rights were ultimately transferred to Netflix. The move shifted the film from a traditional cinema rollout to a global streaming release, allowing it to reach audiences worldwide through the platform. Following its acquisition by Netflix, the project eventually received its final title, Thrash, marking the end of a lengthy development process that had seen multiple title revisions, evolving marketing strategies, and a significant change in distribution before finally reaching viewers in 2026. Thrash was ultimately released worldwide by Netflix on April 10, 2026, making the survival thriller available to audiences across numerous countries simultaneously through the streaming platform. The film's release marked the culmination of a lengthy and evolving distribution journey that underwent several significant changes during its development. Prior to its streaming debut, the project had originally been planned as a traditional theatrical release by Sony Pictures Entertainment. When the film was first announced under the title Beneath the Storm, Sony scheduled it for an exclusive theatrical release in the United States on August 1, 2025, positioning it as a major summer thriller designed to capitalize on audience interest in large-scale disaster and survival films. However, as production and post-production continued, Sony revised its release strategy and later moved the film to a new theatrical release date of July 3, 2026. The date change reflected the studio's ongoing efforts to refine the project's marketing campaign while the film underwent title changes and further development. Despite these plans, the movie's distribution path shifted dramatically in early 2026 when the rights were transferred from Sony Pictures to Netflix. The acquisition transformed the film from a planned theatrical event into a global streaming premiere, allowing viewers to watch it directly from home rather than in cinemas. This strategic move provided Thrash with immediate worldwide accessibility and enabled the film to reach a broad international audience upon release. The April 10, 2026 launch introduced audiences to Tommy Wirkola's hurricane-driven survival thriller months earlier than its previously scheduled July theatrical date. As a result, Thrash became one of Netflix's notable genre releases of 2026, combining disaster film spectacle, shark horror suspense, and survival drama for streaming audiences around the world. Its release represented the final stage of a production journey that had seen multiple title changes, shifting release schedules, and a major transition from a studio-backed theatrical release to a globally accessible streaming debut. One thanks to Netflix, it has finally happened. We got a solid, mid-range, shark attack movie. It's a subgenre with a considerable following but a historically inconsistent output. Jaws put sharks on the map, then 20 years of cheap B-movies came before Deep Blue Sea brought them firmly into the 90s. Open Water was more of a survival thriller outlier, and it was followed The Shallows and The Meg, which shook things up a little in the 21st century. Punctuating these main players were long stretches of very low-budget, low-quality shark movies, the sort that the Sci-Fi Channel would go on to become known for. Pitting a giant shark A or a giant mutated shark A against an equally giant and mutated sea creature became a staple of such fare. But real shark movie fans have been eagerly awaiting some proper films that don't go for the tongue-in-cheek, deliberately stupid tone that has become so prevalent in shark movies. We want thrills, stakes, and decent visuals that swallow us up into the action. And finally, blessedly, Thrash has delivered all of that and more. What is Thrash about? The small town of Abbeville is due a hurricane of epic proportions, one that experts muse could introduce a whole new category and be named for Ted Bundy over the more mundane Harry. While everybody is boarding up and getting the hell out of Dodge, a few locals end up stuck there for one reason or another. Lisa, Phoebe Dynevor, is heavily pregnant and gets called into work unexpectedly. Dakota, Whitney Peak, is home alone, and siblings Dee, Ron, and Will, Alila Brown, Stacy Clausen and Dante Ubaldi, are subject to the reckless whims of their abusive redneck foster dad, who insists he's meaner than any hurricane and that they'll be fine at home. When the hurricane blows in, the levee bursts and the coastal town is flooded. In swims an entire congregation of bull and great white sharks to make the most of the buffet. It's a fabulous disaster setup that blends the best of small-town Americana and large-scale, Roland Emmerich-style action filmmaking. Thrash is still a disaster movie, but it allows for a more intimate atmosphere that closes in on small clusters of people affected by the situation, rather than losing them amidst the crowds of whatever large city is affected. Surely NYC was due a break from this sort of thing. It also lends a remoteness to the location, with the modest buildings easily swallowed up and swept away by the tides and rescue efforts failing to get close to those who need them. Thrash makes perfect use of its location and the physical spaces it offers. Thrash has amazing production values. One of the most egregious characteristics of the majority of shark movies is their lack of budget and imagination. They often take place on a beach, an island, or on the open water, necessitating not much more than a few actors in bikinis, a canoe, and a six-pack of beer. Their limited resources make for very contained experiences that poorly communicate the vastness of the space and the hopelessness of the situation. Thrash, on the other hand, has production values straight out of the best disaster movies of the 90s. Here we have a whole town, with entire buildings flooding, vehicles being scooped up in the current, and trees being torn down by the force, and a stunning amount of this is done practically. The team must have been working with one hell of a water tank and a sizable budget to pull off what this film accomplishes, and every cent of it is spent wisely. Cinematographer Matthew Weston and writer-director Tommy Wirkola, Violent Night, have a great sense of scope and of really use these sets and effects to their fullest. We see it from every angle, in shots long enough for us to take in the scene, and courtesy of plenty of camera motion that guides us through this very real, three-dimensional space. At times, it feels like being on one of those immersive Universal Studios rides, RIP Jaws the ride, because of how well it puts us in the middle of the action. Relatable characters elevate Thrash. It's fairly common for creature features to be populated by characters we feel little to nothing for, flat, cardboard people whose only real purpose is to fill their runtime until they get eaten. Thrash does a solid job of avoiding this standard pitfall. Dakota, as played by the always charming Whitney Peak, suffers from anxiety since the deaths of both her parents. And when she is called upon to leave the relative safety of her house to help Lisa, who is trapped in a flooding car, there is a wholly relatable moment where she goes back inside and just panics. Sure, stressful situations can bring out unexpected strength in some people, but who hasn't watched a disaster movie and simply thought, nope? It's nice to see a movie character have a human reaction to such an unbelievable situation, and, although she eventually musters the courage to help out, her hesitation makes her feel very real. Then, we have the three siblings, who are played with remarkable sincerity and likability by Brown, Clausen and Ubaldi. They, too, behave like real kids, rather than the movie types who always have a smart one-liner to offer and never seem even slightly disturbed or terrified in dangerous situations. They are united in their disdain for their selfish and aggressive foster parents. But they love and support each other. Their various efforts to protect themselves and others from harm are realistically valiant. In fact, characters across the board show the kindness and bravery that we like to believe disaster brings out in us. But it never feels sappy or unbelievable, just a strong show of humanity in perilous times. But beyond all this, Thrash remains a highly entertaining movie. Think The Day After Tomorrow but with sharks. This flick features disastrous imagery, fantastic use of sets, cool animatronics, impressive camera work, and a thoroughly absorbing setup. Importantly, there is also plenty of sharky goodness. Last year's Dangerous Animals was a great little thriller, but it advertised itself as more of a shark movie than it turned out to be. Thrash gives you exactly what it promises, and then some. Now please, let's have more like this. If I could have one Thrash for every 10 Sharktopus, I would be one very happy sharkophile. 2. Thrash, like just about every shark thriller, has a great Z Son of Jaws quality. The one exception, the ingenious open water, everything in the movie, from the chomping shark attacks that churn up the waves with Hawaiian punch foam to the way a humongous great white meets her fate at the end, takes an obvious page from Steven Spielberg's gambits and techniques. But shark movies, because of that derivative quality, and because the directors are not Spielberg, often tend to be dreary and claustrophobic affairs. Thrash, on the other hand, has a lively competence about it, a touch of fluid originality in the staging. It's set in the small town of Neville, SC, which in the first half hour gets hit by a hurricane so intense it's like a tsunami. The weather disaster set up by vintage potboiler lines like, if they ever considered creating a Category 6, this would be it. It's a monster. The size of the storm is all a part of the film's environmental message. The storm starts as a Category 2, until it hits record temperature warm waters off the coast. But once Hurricane Henry crashes through the levees and floods the town, the film's writer-director, Tommy Wirkola, turns a submerged neighborhood block into a kind of water world stage set, like an oversized pond with the upper floors of the houses poking out the top. They're places of refuge, only they keep shifting and collapsing. The storm has brought with it a school of bull sharks, who are smaller and faster than great whites, but just as ravenous. The movie wastes no time delivering the gory goods, which are served up for our delectation like the killings in a slasher movie. If fear was once the pulse of a shark thriller, now it's voyeurism, our chance to feast on what it looks like when a shark feasts. In this case, though, only the unappealing characters get eaten. That's part of the lip-smacking quality of it all, the idea that certain movie characters deserve to have their limbs bitten off. Of the ones who don't, the most original character is Lisa, played by Phoebe Dynevor from Fair Play, not because there's anything complex in how she's drawn, but because she's pregnant as and not just about to have a baby, but she's going to have it during the movie, as she struggles to wriggle away from the sharks. That sounds precarious, and is, but once her infant son has popped out, talk about providing someone with a motivation to take on nature's predators. She's assisted by Dakota, Whitney Peak, the film's other, younger heroine, who at one point makes her way over a floating rooftop and rickety branches, improvising the acrobatics of survival. Dakota, whose mother recently died, is being raised by her marine biologist uncle, played by Djimon Hounsou as the film's token scientist philosopher of disaster. Wirkola, who's Norwegian, has written a bare-bones script, but he knows how to play with space. He stages an encounter in which Ron, Stacy Clausen, a teenage Okie foster child, is swimming around in a basement, with that great white on his tail, and the sequence has a delectably flowing sense of danger. Mostly, though, we're watching the kills come right on cue. This is a Netflix and Chomp movie, just 80 minutes long, if you don't count the closing credits, and the compact runtime does more than keep Thrash from wearing out its welcome. It's part of the film's lean and mean structural unity the way it treats an entire underwater street and its houses like the shark boat in the last act of Jaws, as a safety zone that's rapidly disintegrating. Ron and his two siblings have been living with foster parents who are government-sponging creeps. They eat steak in the basement while tossing their meal ticket kids packages of Wonder Bread, and when Bob, Josh McConville, the loathsome father, gets what's coming to him, it's not scary, it's closer to mutilation porn. He's the steak, there to sate our hunger. A Thrash review. It's Netflix and Chomp, as Phoebe Dynevor stars in a familiar but gruesomely competent shark thriller reviewed online, April 10, 2026. MPA rating, R. Running time, 86 minutes. 3 Plot. When a Category 5 hurricane decimates a coastal town, the storm surge brings devastation, chaos, and something far more frightening, hungry sharks. Review. I'm a pretty easy mark when it comes to shark movies. They're the one type of film that can genuinely unsettle me. I'll blame it on seeing Jaws at 3 years old. But regardless, I always have a certain uneasiness when it comes to any shark movie, good or bad. So I was excited when the trailer for Thrash released, as it looked familiar but still something new for the genre. I just wish that it could pick a lane. Thrash follows the converging stories of people who are trapped in a Category 5 hurricane as it ravages a seaside town. As if the weather wasn't bad enough, sharks take over the town and start taking out anyone who stayed behind. It's hard not to compare Thrash to Alexandria's Crawl, which featured alligators attacking people after floodwaters take over a town. Only instead of gators, we've got sharks. But the setup and even some of the execution is eerily similar. It's just too bad this one goes for B-movie characters without any of the B-movie fun. The hurricane itself is so well done that I was almost disappointed when the sharks showed up. The effects are decent, even if there's a clear visual distinction when they're using actual storm footage. Thrash makes the smart decision not to show the sharks until about the 25-minute mark. They certainly make their presence known, killing a bunch of people fairly quickly. The first half avoids going too over the top, and other than the rabid shark sentience that we always see in shark movies, it takes a more subtle approach. The smaller sharks make the story feel a bit different, and they're gnawing away at their victims rather than taking them down in one bite. They still act like horror movie villains, but that's expected. And did we really need a great white to make the film all the more generic? One of the most intriguing elements is Phoebe Dynevor as Lisa, a pregnant woman who was recently left by her baby daddy. It helps that Dynevor is a great actress, but the pregnancy makes it a bit of a cheat code in rooting for her. She has to be rescued by Whitney, South Dakota, who is agoraphobic after some traumatic event involving her mother. Had the film just focused on them and cared more about the human drama, there could have really been something there. But otherwise, every other character lands with a thud. I mean, come on, how do you underutilize Djimon Hounsou? There's a real awkwardness with the interactions. Everyone just feels slightly off and the dialogue can get pretty rough. It doesn't help that everyone is such a caricature. There's no worse offender than the foster parents who are damn near cartoons, treating their kids like absolute burdens. That entire storyline could have been fun in a film that went a bit sillier, but this just cannot settle on a tone. 1 minute, they're upset about the government checks not being properly used on them. The next, there's dynamite being treated with whimsy. There are some really dumb character decisions, like, rather than using the boat they were just in, deciding to wade through the water instead. I get it, the sharks need to be able to attack, but maybe use the boat. Or the fact that one of the characters constantly gets his sweatshirt stuck to things. It all feels like bad writing. And I've grown to expect a little more from director Tommy Wirkola, so this was disappointing. As much as Thrash is a shark movie, It's never serious enough to make an impact or over the top enough to be B-movie fun. The shark effects are well done, though there is some pretty rough green screen at times. The film feels torn between something more serious and a silly one-liner comedy. Feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to truly be the shark version of Crawl. But there are worse genre films out there. It's a dumb time, but still a mostly harmless way to spend less than 90 minutes. For director, Tommy Wirkola. Writer, Tommy Wirkola. Stars, Phoebe Dynevor, Djimon Hounsou. Costa D'Angelo. Synopsis: when a Category 5 hurricane decimates a coastal town, the storm surge brings devastation, chaos and something far more frightening: hungry sharks. By their very design, shark movies are meant to be thrilling, edge-of-your-seat terror fests. While most shark films try to be Jaws, others lean into the more campy elements, like Deep Blue Sea or The Meg. Tommy Wirkola's Thrash lands in that dreaded in-between where everything is taken too seriously, while forgetting to contain any sort of thrills. It shouldn't be that hard to get the base elements of a shark film correct, but the film is all the wrong kinds of stupid. Instead of dumb fun, it's all just dumb. The characters are never developed enough to actively root for their survival or even be invested in them as characters. Instead, an increasingly silly amount of plot mechanisms get in the characters' way to put them at risk and up the stakes, except the audience barely cares. In an unnamed coastal city, Dale Edwards, Djimon Hounsou, researches sharks off the shores. With an impending hurricane headed towards land, Dale worries about his agoraphobic niece, Dakota, Whitney Peak, getting out before the storm hits. Meanwhile, the very pregnant Lisa Fields, Phoebe Dynevor, attempts to get out of town, but is stuck when the interstate closes. Elsewhere, three foster siblings Ron, Stacy Clausen, Dee, Alila Brown, and Will Olsen, Dante Ubaldi, are forced by their negligent foster parent, Matt Nable, to ride the storm out in their home. As the hurricane makes landfall, the town's levees break, causing floodwaters to engulf the streets and homes. Dakota stays in her home, while Lisa becomes trapped in her car next to a ruptured meat truck. The resulting blood in the water attracts a number of bull sharks who begin killing the citizens as the water continues to rise. For a film under 90 minutes, it feels incredibly rushed. The characterization of Lisa and Dakota should have a bit more time to flesh out in order to understand and empathize with their characters, but instead get a one-line toss-off explanation of why they are each alone. Dakota's agoraphobia, something that should be a dynamic aspect of the story, is barely explored other than for obvious plot mechanics. It doesn't present agoraphobia like a disorder. It makes her seem like an idiot. Same goes for Lisa. They are stuck because of bad decisions, not anything out of their control. The Olsen siblings stop the film dead each time they show up. It's not that they are uninteresting, they just have no backstory. Why are they foster kids? Why is their stepdad so cartoonishly evil the whole time? We barely have time to know their names. We just know they are obviously Australian actors doing terrible American accents. In fact, nothing the Olsens do is in any way consequential to the plot of the rest of the film. They are just added characters with no purpose. The film does have 2 or 3 moments of legitimate interest, but that's in a film of dozens of attempted moments. There is one memorable shark kill among the group, while an attempt to fight back by the Olsens is presented with a bit of flair and style. Outside of that, you know exactly how the film is going to progress, what is going to happen when a character grabs a weapon, and how it will all play out. It's immensely predictable to the point of boredom. While watching actors of the caliber of Dynevor and Hounsou, I just kept hoping they received a nice paycheck for their efforts. They have nothing to cling on to as actors, leading the film to float in a listless purgatory. Clausen, Brown, and Ubaldi don't do anything wrong, besides miss their accent work, but they are too purposeless to make an impact. Peak is in the same boat, attempting to lean into her anxiety, but the film isn't interested enough in her to be memorable. You can tell there was a lot of thought, effort, and money put into the giant water set pieces, but they all end up for nothing. Each character is consistently pelted with rain and usually up to their waist in water. Even those set pieces are unmemorable, leading to a boringly predictable conclusion that boggles the mind. Thrash is a pointless survival thriller devoid of tension or investment. If this was ever released on physical media, it would be doomed to the $5 bargain bin where it belongs. 5 Like unsung Australian horror movie bait, Netflix's Thrash knows that tsunamis are least of your worries after a Category 5 hurricane hits in the movie. Sharks, yes, sharks, wash in with the tide in the latest from writer-director Tommy Wirkola, Violent Night, Dead Snow, and it's a proper nail-biter, with nightmare-inspiring cinematography, increasingly flooded and crumbling sets, impossibly risky scenarios, and solid performances from Djimon Hounsou, Whitney Peak, and Phoebe Dynevor. Thrash earns its place in the long, storied history of shark survival movies. What is Thrash about? Climate disaster films come in all genres, and in Thrash, notably produced by Don't Look Up's Adam McKay, Wirkola leans into the extreme weather impact of a warming planet without addressing it directly. Climate change doesn't cause extreme weather events. Climate change increases the intensity, frequency, and duration of extreme weather events. And nothing's more extreme than watching a Category 5 hurricane absolutely pummel the town of Neville, South Carolina, with fierce winds, destructive flooding, and sharks swimming down Main Street. I'm not here to evaluate the scientific accuracy of this film. Here, we meet several citizens left behind. Whitney Peak as Dakota, who turns off weather reports to watch videos of her recently passed mother. Phoebe Dynevor as Lisa, a meatpacking factory executive who could give birth any moment now, and Stacy Clausen, Lila Brown, and Dante Ubaldi as Hanson the Olsens, a trio of siblings whose crooked foster parents see the storm as just a little bit of weather. Elsewhere, Djimon Hounsou's en route as oceanic researcher Dale, who spotted bull sharks coming in with the storm, seeking shelter in freshwater estuaries. He also happens to be Dakota's uncle. You'll genuinely cheer for these characters as they find themselves suddenly huddled on their kitchen benches, perched on their roof, and on the brink of labor as the floodwaters rise. It's not an easy feat to craft characters you don't want to see as shark bait in a movie like this, and Thrash's cast manage it with finesse, despite Wirkola giving us very little information about them. Peak's physicality doesn't miss a beat, combining ninja warrior obstacle courses with convincing anxiety symptoms. Hounsou's overt authority grants the film legitimacy, and as for Dynevor, well, labor scenes don't happen like this every day. And yes, I feel the soundtrack in Lisa's scenes is internet bait, but I'm not mad about it. Although Thrash is a high-budget Netflix film, the nail-biting scenarios Wirkola throws down are simple often. It's getting from A to B across shark-infested waters, like fellow contained shark horrors The Reef, Open Water, The Shallows, and more recently Under Paris. Thrash pushes its characters into survival situations where simply traveling across a tiny stretch of water seems unthinkable. Here, Wirkola stays far from the supershark territory of the Meg or Deep Blue Sea, keeping his marine predators life-size and emphasizing their more terrifying behaviors. However, he does stick to certain shark movie requirements, like characters being suddenly vertically dragged underwater and shark vision camera angles. Production designer David Ingram builds an increasingly flooded and destroyed town, an impressive and sadly all too real vision of disaster, and one which makes for stressful action sequences. Director of photography Matthew Weston's shots consistently resemble horror movie posters, from a teen teetering over a kitchen doorway as a shark sails underneath to a rooftop shows with sharks circling below. Each overhead moment plays with shadow, scale, and suspense to up the danger, before editor Martin Stoltz takes us back into the action. And as for action, Thrash throws every last visual effect at sequences like the shocking storm surge, which decimates the entire town of Neville within minutes. Make no mistake, Thrash is brutal. The bull sharks, in particular, make for vicious villains, with the species' signature aggressive tendencies displayed with gruesome work from visual effects supervisor Brian Jones and his team. At the risk of sounding like bull shark's publicist, bull shark attacks are extremely rare. If you like shark movies, Thrash is a solid survival thriller with a talented cast and visuals that had me locked in. Wirkola's ability to balance horror, action, and comedy remains a praiseworthy feat. Dive into it. Shannon Cannell is Mashable's senior editor, general assignments, based in London. She has been Mashable's UK editor, and still manages the illustrious UK team, and Australia editor, but emotionally, She lives searching for Exit 8. A Tomatometer-approved critic, Shannon writes about entertainment, tech, social good, science, culture, and Australian horror, and loves to nerd out with movie stars, filmmakers, and TV creators. 6. Thrash is basically a mixture of Crawl and Jaws that's suffering from an identity crisis. Look, if you are making a shark movie, I am contractually, not actually, obligated to talk about the Steven Spielberg classic, because it's just that good. It's dramatic, it has politics, it features some of the best filmmaking your eyes have ever seen, the acting in it is fantastic, and it has a shark that malfunctioned so much that it forced the crew to change their approach to creating suspense, thereby making it one of the most nerve-wracking films of all time. Many movies, including the sequels, that came after it tried to emulate its success and failed. Hence, they had to employ mutated, CGI animals to get the job done. While I do enjoy movies like Under Paris or Meg every now and then, I yearn for creature features that go back to the basics and keep the scale low and the tension high. That's why I really enjoyed Crawl and Djimon, the Thai original. The pool was not really good, but, you know, crocs are crocs, and sharks are sharks. They are not interchangeable, and crocs, or alligators, don't necessarily scratch the itch that sharks do. Something about the fin just does it for me. So, I was excited for Thrash because it seemed to be operating on a limited budget and featured regular people tackling regular sharks. Then where did it go wrong? Let's find out. Tommy Wirkola's Thrash follows 3 sets of characters in a coastal town called Dynevor, which becomes a shark-infested locality after Hurricane Henry breaks the seawall. The first set has foster siblings Dee, Ron, and Will, who live with their foster parents Billy and Rachel. When the flood wrecks their house, Billy and Rachel are seemingly killed by the sharks, which forces the foster siblings to come up with a way to stay alive until help arrives. The second set has Lisa and Dakota. Lisa is a pregnant woman who gets stuck in her car while trying to get out of town with the rest of the evacuees. Thankfully, the place where Lisa gets stuck is near the house that belongs to Dakota, who hasn't been able to escape as well, because of her agoraphobia, and she helps Lisa get out of her car and take shelter in her bedroom. Last but not the least, there's Dale, a marine biologist and Dakota's uncle, who is heading towards Dynevor with a small crew, Brian, Doug, and Joe, in order to get Dakota out of the pickle she is in. Well, he and Brian have a secondary purpose too. They have been tracking a great white shark named Nellie for the past few years, and she seems to be in Dynevor too. So, it's not just a rescue mission, but also a shark tracking mission. And if the issue with the plot isn't clear already, allow me to underscore it. There are too many subplots. The best part about Thrash is the Olsen foster home subplot, because it's about a flood and sharks coming as a blessing in disguise for a trio of kids who were being emotionally and probably physically abused by their foster parents. So, seeing those evil cretins get killed off by sharks in the most comically absurd fashion, while the kids come together as a unit is quite satisfying. Yes, the theme kinda falls apart when the kids have to kill the sharks who have just saved them, but it's still fun. The camera work, the lighting, the editing, the darkly comedic tone, Dee asking if they'll need new foster parents got a big laugh out of me, and the performances from Lila Brown, Stacey Clausen, and Dante Ubaldi come together as smoothly as a well-oiled machine. And then there's the rest of the film, which is just boring. There's some motherhood-centric thematic thread that links Dakota, Lisa, and Nellie. Because Dakota had lost her mother, Lisa is about to become a mother, and Nellie is pregnant too. But, much like in Djimon, a pregnant animal instinctively saving a pregnant human doesn't really make all that much sense to me, especially when you have literal human saviors on their way. The whole Dale subplot is such a waste of time, because all they do is exposit shark and weather facts. I think marine biology and meteorology enthusiasts will find that entertaining. However, a normie like me needs all that to be presented in a more engaging and digestible format. The foster sibling subplot and the girls' rescue subplot actually feel like two different movies. There are crash zooms in the foster sibling subplot, while the girls' rescue subplot is just filled with overhead shots to show the sharks swimming around. The humor in the foster sibling subplot contrasts the bleakness of the flood and the threat of the sharks so well. In the case of the girls' rescue subplot, they try to use the agoraphobia and the pregnancy to ramp up the tension, but they overuse it so much that it loses its impact. The sharks are used economically, and the CGI and VFX used to bring them to life is solid. The lighting is okay for the most part, but during the dawn scenes, the quality nosedives drastically. I am pretty sure that this mustn't have been a very easy movie to shoot, because the actors are wet for 99% of their screen time. I know that productions have to keep the water warm so that the cast and crew don't die of hypothermia, so it's not as freezing as it looks on camera. However, if you think that acting in warm water for days on end is a luxury, feel free to do it yourself and report back to me. So, yeah, despite my criticisms about the plot, I salute the cast and crew for delivering stunts and dramatic scenes in a believable fashion and giving us such an immersive experience. I think Netflix is desperate to get its very own shark franchise. After the success of the Meg films, they did Under Paris, and while it was neither liked by critics, nor by audiences, it attracted enough eyeballs to warrant a sequel. The first movie came out in 2024, we are in 2026, where's that follow-up? I don't know. Now, we have Thrash, which feels like a very blatant attempt at emulating the success of the Sharknado films. I don't know if it's going to balloon into a franchise, even though they clearly want to make more Thrash films based on that last-minute stinger. But if they do get to make more Shark Hurricane films, I hope they ramp up the camp. I appreciate the Jaws homages, but if somebody wants to watch Jaws, or Crawl for that matter, they are going to watch that. What's the point of reheating those nachos and forcing people to eat it? Even if you can't go as crazy as the Sharknado movies, you must do something original, because that's what sells in this current cinematic landscape. As mentioned before, the foster siblings subplot was fun enough to bring something new to this oversaturated subgenre. More of that would be greatly appreciated. And, yes, I'd recommend giving the film a watch just for that trio's tryst with sharks. 7. Sometimes you just need a movie that knows what it is. Thrash is the kind of creature feature that we grew up loving, a monster movie that's willing to embrace its chaos. The Netflix original film gives us plenty of gore, shark attacks, and absurd character beats. Director Tommy Wirkola, Dead Snow, has made a career of letting his movies take fantastical twists and turns, and this one is no different. What is Thrash about? A hurricane is about to make landfall on the East Coast, swelling up to a Category 5. In the small town of Neville, many are unconcerned because they are protected by levees. However, when they break, the water comes rushing into the town faster than people can react. When a meat truck breaks, its cargo attracts something even more dangerous than the floods, sharks. With the new threats circling, the very pregnant Lisa, Phoebe Dynevor, does everything she can to survive. With the help of Dakota, Whitney Peak, she might even find shelter as her body goes into labor. Elsewhere in town, foster siblings D, Elila Brown, Will, Dante Ubaldi, and Ron, Stacy Clausen, fight for survival. The only rescue coming for the survivors is Dakota's uncle, Dr. Dale Edwards, Djimon Hounsou. A good old-fashioned shark movie that never takes itself too seriously. As soon as Thrash starts talking about Hurricane Henry, it lets us know just how crazy it wants to get. A meteorologist believes they should call the hurricane Ted Bundy because of the danger, which would be funny in its own right. However, combined with people who are unwilling to leave their homes for safety, Wirkola puts part of the blame on his characters. While some storms are possible to ride out, he knows that we'll have less sympathy for most of the victims if they're painted as dumb. Thrash seeks to capitalize on that advantage. Wirkola also keeps the character types and tropes in place to help hasten the storytelling. There's a pregnant woman who is set as our protagonist. We see the young girl who has recently experienced extreme trauma but is going to face her fears. The found family seeks safety from predators, and also sharks, for the first time. Even the scientists are caricatures of the never listen to scientists. By taking these shortcuts in the narrative, Thrash has more time to give us silly and absurd shark attacks. Wirkola knows exactly what kind of movie he's making from the jump. He gives us the high body count we want with a shark film while also showing off some gnarly kills. More than once, Thrash dismembers a character and asks us to watch them fight for survival. They rarely make it. This also helps to avoid over-reliance on the limited visual effects budgets. While the sharks are used effectively, Thrash does not overuse the visual models, keeping things fresh for the audience. The sharks don't have too many variations of attack. After all, they are sharks, but there's still plenty of fun to be had. Thrash also wears its influences on its sleeve. Jaws is all over the movie, frankly, to a distracting amount within the first 10 minutes. The hurricane setup is playing with Growl, while Rennie Harlin's Deep Blue Sea is just as influential on how the sharks attack. Some extra pieces of dialogue hint at a more sciencey undertone to the story, but clocking in at 85 minutes on Netflix, Thrash cuts the fat where it can. Wirkola uses ADR to help fill in gaps of the story and set up events to come. They're distracting, but he also knows that the shark attacks will pay off in spades anyway. Ultimately, Thrash is cut from the same cloth as Under Paris but with fewer kills. It's willing to give us the scalps of people who wrong our protagonists. It also does not push a single boundary in terms of storytelling. It knows that you want allusions to Jaws and the big payoffs when they matter most. It also knows that its 5-ish protagonists need to prove their badass credentials, but does so in some of the most ridiculous ways imaginable. The actors have very little to do, yet it has a surprisingly excellent cast. Dynevor is the star and gets the screen time to prove it. Her character also takes enough risks and has some badass moments to prove the actress can still give a compelling performance in a downright silly movie. The Bridgerton does not often take on action roles, but she's believable here. Peak crafts a believably trauma-burdened character, though she does rely on tropes of agoraphobia and PTSD at times. It's not a performance to write home about, but she's a serviceable part of the flick. Clausen is miscast, but that falls entirely on his ridiculous accent. He's having fun in the role, and anyone looking to question his talent will have those doubts erased later in 2026 when Leviticus releases. Is Thrash worth watching? Yes, but this is the ultimate turn-your-brain-off movie. If you examine anything about this movie too much, it falls apart. But you're not here to question the logic of a shark attack movie. You're here to watch sharks feast. Thrash is a turn-off-your-brain popcorn flick, and if you're not in the mood for that, it's an easy skip. However, I am ready to queue this up for a round 2. Sometimes you need a dumb but fun shark movie to help get you to the weekend. 8. It's pretty much impossible to sit down to Thrash and not feel like you know what you're in for. Anytime I described its premise to someone, a survival thriller about a small town flooded by a storm and then infested with killer sharks, they'd make a face that said, I know what kind of movie that is. And for those who seek it out, the most important question it must answer is whether the filmmakers knew what kind of movie they were making. The primary yardstick by which this film will be judged is whether they got it right. It's clear from very early on that they did. Despite having a decent budget and some recognizable actors to work with, writer-director Tommy Wirkola, known for Nazi zombie film Dead Snow and his sand-to-action film Violent Night, ensured what ended up on screen was a pretty fun B-picture. It doesn't have the stylistic touch that can sometimes bring a little something extra to playful genre films, nor does it have a true standout sequence that could give it a chance at a longer cultural life. But it does have just the tone you'd hope it would, especially as it nears its climax, and that's all it really needs to deliver the goods. Netflix's new shark thriller is exactly the kind of fun you were hoping for when Thrash begins. The town of Vaneville, South Carolina is already headed for disaster. What began as a small storm just hours prior is now Hurricane Henry, which has grown so strong that one character suggests it should have been named Hurricane Ted Bundy. So, the movie uses our first layer of disbelief as a way to introduce its characters, focusing our attention on why each one hasn't evacuated. And it's obvious about it, too. The first one we really meet is Dakota, Whitney Peak, whose agoraphobia, in a genre movie context, immediately registers as a reason to get stuck in the shark storm. We go on down the list this way. Marine researcher Dale, Djimon Hounsou, is Dakota's uncle, and will actually get himself into trouble to save her. The very pregnant Lisa, Phoebe Dynevor, was forced to come into work that day, and given she was just recently left by her fiancé tilde copyright, she's hardly in a position to say number. Ron, Stacey Clausen, D. Alila Brown, and Will, Dante Ubaldi, 3 foster siblings living out near the swamp, are at the mercy of their foster father, Billy, Matt Nabel, who insists this ain't nothing but a little bit of weather. It's ultimately a clever strategy, not only for its efficiency, but also because it establishes each of them as characters worth rooting for. They did not choose to stay, but were compelled to, and thus become people we'd like to see survive this ordeal. Thrash wastes no time getting to the moment Henry breaks the levee, floods the town, and causes a meat transport truck to spill its bloody contents into the water. Almost everyone we've met so far is placed in immediate peril, none more urgently than Lisa, who is trapped in her car by a tree branch as the water level steadily rises. For a while, there's a real sense of danger, and the film seems capable of tipping into a more serious-minded thriller. Then the first shark attack happens, after which a man pops out of the water, looks at the bloody stump where his arm used to be, and yells. I laughed and leaned back, confident I was in good hands. From there, things only escalate, and the laughs keep coming. If I had to pinpoint one thing that keeps this movie from getting to that next level, it would be the uneven execution. Wirkola is clearly tuned into his material, and the camera movement and editing are in sync with the tone he's after. But from scene to scene, the general feeling oscillates. Sometimes it's a performance that takes the material a bit too seriously, sometimes it's a set piece that lets the ball drop a little. Nothing that can't be redeemed by the next scene, but enough that my level of engagement ebbed and flowed. Though releasing on Netflix, this film was originally intended for theaters, dated, delayed, and ultimately undated by producers Sony Pictures. Though that history is visible in how it looks, as well as in the economical visual storytelling deployed throughout, I thought about it most as the shark storm chaos reached its height. Some moments were clearly designed to get a big laugh, and with a crowd, that intoxicating feeling of shared release would only have fueled the finale. However, and this is the sign a movie is well suited to a casual stream. Watching it alone at home was no less of a good time. 9. Tommy Wirkola's Thrash is a film that refuses to apologize for being exactly what it is, a high-stakes, somewhat ridiculous sharks and a hurricane survival thriller. It's a movie that takes the grounds of a natural disaster and stitches it onto the chaotic energy of a creature feature, resulting in a 90-minute ride that is stressful as it is absurd. The film drops us into the quiet coastal town of Neville, caught in the tightening grip of Hurricane Henry. As the storm surges in, it doesn't arrive alone. Floodwaters turn the streets into channels for a new kind of predator, carrying ravenous bull sharks into the homes of those who stayed behind. We follow Lisa, Phoebe Dynevor, a pregnant woman trapped in her submerged vehicle, Dakota, Whitney Peak, who is an agoraphobic teen, forced to face her fears as the water rises in her home, and Dale, Djimon Hounsou, as the marine expert racing against the tide to reach his niece. Threading through our primary leads are 3 kids, discarded by their foster parents, navigating their waterlogged house as something deadly moves beneath the surface. At its core, the film is a web of stranded residents fighting rising waters and their own fears in a desperate bid to make it through the storm alive. In terms of tone, the sharks and the hurricane don't function as independent dangers. Instead, they fuse into a singular, relentless onslaught of nature. The movie is at its best during the claustrophobic sequences set in flooded, tight quarters, where the cloudy water and erratic threats create a genuine sense of dread. A constant, pulsing energy drives the story forward, supported by character journeys that, though familiar, carry enough authenticity to keep the viewer invested in their survival. While the plot occasionally loses momentum as it bounces between different key arcs, the massive scale of the disaster serves as a consistent weight that keeps the film on track. This polish extends to the creature effects, which stand out as some of the most striking digital work since Beast of War. A standout moment features a great white emerging in sunlit water. The level of detail is startling and deeply eerie, fitting perfectly into the scene without ever breaking the immersive experience. What makes Thrash an engaging feature is the choice to split its focus across several, vulnerable characters. Lisa brings some of the film's most claustrophobic moments, where every inch of rising water mirrors a ticking clock. These moments are tamed by an unexpected soundtrack, but it's a welcomed bit of humor amongst the film's thrilling nature. The physiological edge delivered from Dakota showcases the natural reaction to their sudden circumstance, and the inclusion of 3 abandoned foster children injects a raw, emotional urgency, particularly because it taps into the fear of being left behind. This braided narrative structure offers a refreshing change of pace instead of a singular protagonist. We get several characters who are forced to become their own designated heroes. Furthermore, the film avoids relying on over-the-top, extravagant set pieces. Instead, the cast manages to sell a profound sense of terror using very little. In the end, Thrash succeeds at being a gripping survival horror that blends the terrifying reality of a natural disaster with the teeth of the ocean. It delivers on suspense, sharp CGI, well-established characters and stunning visuals. It's not your winning cinematic masterpiece, however. Thrash serves exactly what a Friday night needs: pure, binge-worthy entertainment. Thrash is streaming now on Netflix. Want more film reviews? Dive into more reviews, rankings, and film conversations on our site. Explore Film Focus online now. 10. A massive storm floods a small South Carolina town, trapping several residents. They're further imperiled when the wreckage of a meat truck draws a shiver of hungry sharks. Even by the it's not Jaws standards of most shark films that aren't, Jaws, Netflix's Thrash is very much not Jaws. In fact, it's more Crawley Alexandria's impressively gnarly gators in a flood film, where the opening natural disaster is only the beginning of the character's problems. That premise is effectively replicated here, just with fins instead of scales, as a hurricane tears through the town of Ineville, and while most residents flee before it's too late, several are left behind to deal not just with the rising waters, but the toothy horrors they contain. The results are mostly watered-down chum, albeit with occasional fun to be found. Writer-director Tommy Wirkola behind Nazi Zombie Fest Dead Snow and Santa but John Wick actioner Violent Night is no stranger to a schlocky premise, and keeps the tone playful and light. His script signals the third act mayhem with all the subtlety of an exploding yellow barrel when Phoebe Dynevor's heavily pregnant Lisa gets a call from her anxious mother early on, asking if she's still thinking of a water birth. You know where things are headed. The same goes, too, for Whitney Peak's young Dakota, an agoraphobe who hasn't left the house since her mother died, about to get an unexpected incentive to venture outside again. And across town, a trio of foster kids find that the sharks are only mildly less dangerous than their nefarious carers. Even for a shark B-movie, Thrash is particularly thin and silly, with stock characters and a premise that I tackled with far more bite. The sharks themselves feel intangible and offer little suspense, while the opening flood is awash in unpolished CGI. Still, you can't fault it going for broke in the final act, chucking dynamite explosions, maternal rage and Vanessa Carlton's millennial classic 1,000 Miles into the mix to undeniably entertaining effect. If you've stuck it out that far, it's not Jaws, it's not even Crawl, but it is quite fun, if you turn your brain almost completely off. More shallow than The Shallows, and lacking the depth of even a Deep Blue Sea, this has chuckle-worthy moments but will be forgotten roughly 47 meters down in the lower echelons of shark cinema. Just so you know, we may receive a commission or other compensation from the links on this website. Read why you should trust us. 11. Tommy Wirkola's Thrash is a film that refuses to apologize for being exactly what it is, a high-stakes, somewhat ridiculous sharks and a hurricane survival thriller. It's a movie that takes the grounds of a natural disaster and stitches it onto the chaotic energy of a creature feature, resulting in a 90-minute ride that is stressful as it is absurd. The film drops us into the quiet coastal town of Ineville, caught in the tightening grip of Hurricane Henry. As the storm surges in, it doesn't arrive alone. Floodwaters turn the streets into channels for a new kind of predator, carrying ravenous bull sharks into the homes of those who stayed behind. We follow Lisa, Phoebe Dynevor, a pregnant woman trapped in her submerged vehicle; Dakota, Whitney Peak, who is an agoraphobic teen, forced to face her fears as the water rises in her home; and Dale, Djimon Hounsou, As the marine expert racing against the tide to reach his niece, threading through our primary leads are three kids, discarded by their foster parents, navigating their waterlogged house as something deadly moves beneath the surface. At its core, the film is a web of stranded residents fighting rising waters and their own fears in a desperate bid to make it through the storm alive. In terms of tone, the sharks and the hurricane don't function as independent dangers. Instead, they fuse into a singular, relentless onslaught of nature. The movie is at its best during the claustrophobic sequences set in flooded, tight quarters, where the cloudy water and erratic threats create a genuine sense of dread. A constant, pulsing energy drives the story forward, supported by character journeys that, though familiar, carry enough authenticity to keep the viewer invested in their survival. While the plot occasionally loses momentum as it bounces between different key arcs, the massive scale of the disaster serves as a consistent weight that keeps the film on track. This polish extends to the creature effects, which stand out as some of the most striking digital work since Beast of War. A standout moment features a great white emerging in sunlit water. The level of detail is startling and deeply eerie, fitting perfectly into the scene without ever breaking the immersive experience. What makes Thrash an engaging feature is the choice to split its focus across several vulnerable characters. Lisa brings some of the film's most claustrophobic moments, where every inch of rising water mirrors a ticking clock. These moments are tamed by an unexpected soundtrack, but it's a welcomed bit of humor amongst the film's thrilling nature. The physiological edge delivered from Dakota showcases the natural reaction to their sudden circumstance, and the inclusion of three abandoned foster children injects a raw, emotional urgency, particularly because it taps into the fear of being left behind. This braided narrative structure offers a refreshing change of pace. Instead of a singular protagonist, we get several characters who are forced to become their own designated heroes. Furthermore, the film avoids relying on over-the-top, extravagant set pieces. Instead, the cast manages to sell a profound sense of terror using very little. In the end, Thrash succeeds at being a gripping survival horror that blends the terrifying reality of a natural disaster with the teeth of the ocean. It delivers on suspense, sharp CGI, well-established characters and stunning visuals. It's not your winning cinematic masterpiece. However, Thrash serves exactly what a Friday night needs: pure, binge-worthy entertainment. Thrash is streaming now on Netflix. Want more film reviews? Dive into more reviews, rankings, and film conversations on our site. Explore Film Focus online now. 12 Phoebe Dynevor and Djimon Hounsou are left adrift in a suspense-free dud that has cycled through 2 distributors and 3 titles due to the sheer amount of money Netflix has to play with. Last year it spent about $18 billion on content, and the ever-increasing number of subscribers it must satiate. The streamer often acts as a home for the unwanted goods of others, a digital island of misfit toys. At one stage, the shark thriller Beneath the Storm was being primed for a theatrical release by Sony, shot back in 2024. The following year it was renamed Shiver and slated for an August premiere. Cut to 2026 and it's now known as Thrash, unceremoniously offloaded to Netflix instead. While this might not be the most encouraging Wikipedia description of a technically new film, it's also not always a cause for concern. Back in 2018, David Ellison found Alex Garland's stylish and scary sci-fi thriller Annihilation too intellectual, so passed it to Netflix for the majority of international territories. In early COVID, Disney sold the unusually excellent Fear Street trilogy to Netflix. Just last year, Netflix saw its biggest hit to date with K-pop, Demon Hunters, a film that had originally been intended for a Sony release. But Thrash is not a fellow exception to the rule. If anything, it acts as the very definition of what the rule usually is: a messily made, choppily edited and entirely misfiring cavalcade of bad decisions and dodgy accents. I just hope Netflix got it on the cheap. A broken bar, one would surely assume so given how cheap the film itself looks. Often when Netflix does buy a real studio movie, even the worst examples will boast a well-lit gloss that separates them from the standard Netflix originals, Chicken vs. Chick. But Thrash, which by the way is the worst of the 3 titles this film has had, looks like it could have been a Sharknado Week original movie for sci-fi. far tinier than what we have come to expect from a one-time theatrical play. It has a distracting sense of inauthenticity from the very beginning. A film directed by a Norwegian and set in the US but shot in Australia with mostly Australian actors apart from a British lead who is playing American. It's from writer-director Tommy Wirkola, whose work is usually known for its knowingly silly midnight movie disposability. He made the Nazi zombie horror Dead Snow and its sequel, as well as the Santa action comedy Violent Night and the self-explanatory Hansel Gretel, Witch Hunters. The elevator pitch here is what of sharks but also disaster thriller, as a hurricane destroys a town while also thrusting a pack of bull sharks into the streets and homes of those unlucky enough to still be there. It's hugely reminiscent of Alexandria's Crawl, which spun the same premise but with an alligator, which was itself hugely reminiscent of Burning Bright, which used a tiger. It's by far the least effective of the three, and not just because sharks have become overused B-movie bad guys of late. In the last year, we've had Bikini Shark, Lone Star Shark, Beast of War, Into the Deep and the surprisingly sharp Dangerous Animals among many others, but mostly because Wirkola just doesn't feel like the right director for the job. His films are largely tongue-in-cheek, prioritizing big laughs over big scares, and without any real experience in the art of suspense or any real seriousness. He feels as adrift as his actors. We should be on the edge of our seat, but every should-be set piece falls flat. The choreography always feeling a little off, and the editing never works as tightly as it should. For a director who has also frequently reveled in gonzo gore, Wirkola's shark attacks are lacking in anything really nasty enough to provoke a reaction other than a sustained boo. Bridgerton's Phoebe Dynevor, whose last Netflix thriller Fair Play was unfairly underplayed, is stuck with a character so comically careless that it's hard to spend much time fretting over what happens to her. She's a heavily pregnant woman who has managed to avoid every warning to leave town until she's left alone in her car when the flooding begins. On the edge of giving birth, across the other side of town, a trio of American kids, played by clearly Australian actors, must outsmart circling sharks after their cruel foster parents are chewed up into bits. Meanwhile, Djimon Hounsou, an actor who so often deserves better than the low-level genre mush he's given, is given shreds of labored shark exposition as a marine biologist trying to save his niece. Rather than the ensemble approach allowing for different forms of tension to escalate and add to our general sense of unease, it just takes away any of the clammy claustrophobia we could have otherwise felt if we stuck with one of the stories, an approach that helped tie it to make Crawl that much more of an experience. With so many sharks seen casually throughout so much of the movie, even the traditionally sinister sight of a fin above water quickly loses its power, allowing the sharks to become just as boring as the humans. Perhaps the best use of Thrash is to help cure those with galiophobia, proving that they're really not that scary after all. 13 A hurricane floods a small coastal town, unleashing hungry sharks in the process. Originally published April 14, 2026. If the premise of Thrash sounds familiar, you might have run across the movie when it was announced back in 2024 under its original title Beneath the Storm, or perhaps in 2025, when it was retitled Shivering, set for a theatrical release in August of that year. Now the movie has been renamed once again and its cinema release scrapped. Sony have sold it off to Netflix, who have dumped it on their platform with all the ceremony of an unwanted goldfish being flushed down a toilet. It's more likely that Thrash's premise sounds familiar because it's essentially a knockoff of Alexandria's fun 2019 creature feature Crawl. That movie saw a Florida coastal town flooded, with alligators unleashed in the midst of the disaster. Thrash swaps out alligators for sharks, but Norwegian writer-director Tommy Wirkola fails to generate any of the thrills of his French counterpart. Taking its cues from the Irwin Allen disaster movies of the 1970s, Thrash introduces distinct groups of characters, cutting between their various predicaments throughout the movie. When a storm sees the town of Inneville flooded, the rising tides are the least of the worries of those who failed to get out in time. The water has brought with it a shoal of hungry bull sharks, attracted by the offal from a nearby meat processing plant. There's also a great white thrown in for good measure. The sharks are being tracked by marine researcher Dale Edwards, Djimon Hounsou, whose character hails from Mozambique yet is somehow named Dale Edwards, whose agoraphobic niece Dakota, Whitney Peak, is trapped in her submerging home in Neville. Star power comes courtesy of Phoebe Dynevor, who must be royally pissed that her shot at headlining a summer blockbuster has resulted in her being relegated to Netflix once again. The English actress plays the heavily pregnant Lisa, who gets stuck in her car when a tree collapses. The incident happens just across the street from Dakota's home, and Lisa pleads for the teen to come and rescue her. At this point, any sympathy I had for Lisa went out the window. Girl, you could have left town earlier and avoided this. Now you're ordering a teenage girl to risk her life to save your ass? Another subplot is focused on a trio of orphans, Elila Brown, Stacey Clausen, Dante Ubaldi, who resemble refugees from a Mark Twain story. When their hilariously villainous foster father, Matt Nable, refuses to leave town because it's just weather, they find themselves marooned in their home as sharks swirl outside. 14. There's a pulpy, irresistible premise at the heart of Thrash. A Category 5 hurricane slams into a coastal town, only to unleash a feeding frenzy of sharks drawn inland by blood-soaked floodwaters. It's the kind of high-concept setup that practically sells itself, blending disaster spectacle with creature feature chaos. Directed by Tommy Wirkola and produced by Adam McKay alongside Kevin Messick, the film has the pedigree and ambition to deliver a wild ride. Unfortunately, what should have been a gleefully unhinged survival thriller instead sinks under the weight of uneven execution, tonal confusion, and frustratingly underdeveloped characters. The setup: Wirkola, known for his flair for genre mashups and over-the-top violence, seems like a natural fit for this kind of material. And to be fair, Thrash occasionally delivers flashes of that gonzo energy. There are sequences that lean into the absurdity of sharks prowling through suburban streets and flooded homes, evoking the spirit of B-movie classics while attempting to scale things up with modern production values. But those moments are scattered, struggling to rise above a film that too often feels unsure of whether it wants to be a tense survival drama, a satirical disaster movie, or a full-blown creature feature spectacle. The biggest issue lies in the script, which never quite finds a compelling through line. The film juggles multiple storylines as a Dakota trapped by her agoraphobia, Lisa's desperate situation as a pregnant woman caught in the storm, and a group of siblings dealing with their unstable foster parents, but it fails to weave them into a cohesive emotional narrative. Each thread has potential, particularly Dakota's psychological struggle and Lisa's vulnerability, yet the film rarely invests enough time to make their journeys feel meaningful. Instead, the characters often come across as narrative devices, shuffled from one perilous scenario to the next without much development. Concept lost in narrative chaos. Whitney Peak does what she can with Dakota, bringing a sense of fragility and determination to a role that could have been far more compelling with stronger writing. Her agoraphobia is introduced as a central trait, but it's handled in a surface-level manner that feels more like a plot convenience than a deeply explored condition. The film gestures toward emotional depth without committing to it, leaving Peak to fill in the gaps with a performance that's more nuanced than the script deserves. Similarly, Phoebe Dynevor brings a grounded presence to Lisa, but her storyline is reduced to a series of escalating dangers rather than a fully realized arc. The idea of a pregnant woman navigating a flooded, shark-infested town during a hurricane is inherently tense, yet the film relies heavily on contrived scenarios and predictable beats. Dynevor's performance suggests a more human story beneath the chaos, but the film rarely slows down long enough to let those moments breathe. The most compelling presence in the film is Djimon Hounsou as Dale, a marine researcher with a personal connection to the unfolding disaster. Hounsou brings gravitas and a sense of urgency that elevates his scenes, even when the dialogue veers into exposition-heavy territory. His subplot, involving a tagged great white shark and a rescue mission, hints at a more focused and engaging narrative that the film never fully embraces. Instead, it becomes just another thread in an already overcrowded tapestry. Struggling against thin writing, the hurricane sequences are occasionally impressive, with swirling winds and collapsing structures creating a convincing sense of chaos. The flooded town setting offers a unique playground for the film's action, turning familiar suburban spaces into unpredictable danger zones. However, the CGI sharks are inconsistent at best. Some shots convey real menace, while others look distractingly artificial. undermining the tension the film is trying to build. In a genre that relies heavily on the believability of its creatures, this inconsistency proves to be a significant drawback. The action set pieces, while plentiful, often lack the clarity and escalation needed to make them truly memorable. There's a tendency to rely on quick cuts and chaotic camera work, which can make it difficult to follow what's happening on screen. Instead of building suspense, these sequences frequently devolve into noisy, disorienting spectacles that prioritize volume over impact. It's a surprising misstep for Wirkola, whose previous work has demonstrated a stronger grasp of how to stage kinetic, engaging action. Another issue is the film's tonal inconsistency. At times, Thrash seems to embrace its own absurdity, leaning into the inherent ridiculousness of its premise with moments of dark humor and over-the-top violence. But just as often, it attempts to play things straight, emphasizing the emotional stakes and human drama. This push and pull creates a disjointed viewing experience, where it's never entirely clear how seriously the film wants to be taken. The result is a movie that feels caught between two identities, never fully committing to either. Spectacle without substance. The supporting cast, including the younger actors playing the siblings, are given little to work with beyond broad character traits and predictable conflicts. Their storyline, which involves family tension and survival against the odds, has the potential to add a different dimension to the film. Instead, it feels like filler, occasionally intersecting with the main plot but never contributing in a meaningful way. The interpersonal drama often comes across as forced, lacking the authenticity needed to make the stakes feel real. Even the film's attempts at social commentary touching on themes of disaster preparedness, economic disparity, and environmental vulnerability are underdeveloped. These ideas are introduced but not explored in any depth, serving more as background noise than as integral components of the story. It's another example of the film reaching for more than it can effectively handle, resulting in a narrative that feels cluttered rather than layered. Overall, despite its many shortcomings, Thrash isn't entirely without merit. There are moments of genuine tension, particularly in sequences that isolate characters in confined, flooded spaces. The concept itself remains compelling, and there's a certain guilty pleasure in watching the film embrace its more outrageous elements. For viewers willing to overlook its flaws, there's some entertainment to be found in its chaotic energy and occasional bursts of creativity. Still, those moments are not enough to elevate the film as a whole. Thrash ultimately feels like a missed opportunity of film with a great premise and a capable cast that never quite comes together. It lacks the narrative focus, character development, and tonal clarity needed to make its high-concept idea truly work. What could have been a standout entry in the disaster thriller genre instead ends up as a forgettable, uneven effort. In the end, Thrash is a storm that makes a lot of noise but leaves little lasting impact. It thrashes around with ambition and spectacle, but without a strong foundation to support it. The film is quickly swept away, leaving behind only the faint memory of what might have been. Despite its many shortcomings, Thrash isn't entirely without merit. There are moments of genuine tension, particularly in sequences that isolate characters in confined, flooded spaces. The concept itself remains compelling, and there's a certain guilty pleasure in watching the film embrace its more outrageous elements. For viewers willing to overlook its flaws, there's some entertainment to be found in its chaotic energy and occasional bursts of creativity. A wildly entertaining high-concept premise blending hurricanes and sharks, weak, unfocused script with too many underdeveloped storylines, inconsistent CGI that undermines the shark threat, tonal imbalance between serious drama and campy spectacle, action scenes that feel chaotic rather than suspenseful. Summary: in the end, Thrash is a storm that makes a lot of noise but leaves little lasting impact. It thrashes around with ambition and spectacle, but without a strong foundation to support it. The film is quickly swept away, leaving behind only the faint memory of what might have been. 15 Plot: when a Category 5 hurricane decimates a coastal town, the storm surge brings devastation, chaos, and something far more frightening: hungry sharks. Review: I'm a pretty easy mark when it comes to shark movies. They're the one type of film that can genuinely unsettle me. I'll blame it on seeing Jaws at 3 years old. But regardless, I always have a certain uneasiness when it comes to any shark movie, good or bad. so I was excited when the trailer for Thrash released, as it looked familiar but still something new for the genre. I just wish that it could pick a lane. Thrash follows the converging stories of people who are trapped in a Category 5 hurricane as it ravages a seaside town. As if the weather wasn't bad enough, sharks take over the town and start taking out anyone who stayed behind. It's hard not to compare Thrash to Alexandria's Crawl, which featured alligators attacking people after floodwaters take over a town. Only instead of gators, we've got sharks, but the setup and even some of the execution is eerily similar. It's just too bad this one goes for B-movie characters without any of the B-movie fun. The hurricane itself is so well done that I was almost disappointed when the sharks showed up. The effects are decent, even if there's a clear visual distinction when they're using actual storm footage. Thrash makes the smart decision not to show the sharks until about the 25-minute mark. They certainly make their presence known, killing a bunch of people fairly quickly. The first half avoids going too over the top, and other than the rabid shark sentience that we always see in shark movies, it takes a more subtle approach. The smaller sharks make the story feel a bit different, and they're gnawing away at their victims rather than taking them down in one bite. They still act like horror movie villains, but that's expected. And did we really need a great white to make the film all the more generic? One of the most intriguing elements is Phoebe Dynevor as Lisa, a pregnant woman who was recently left by her baby daddy. It helps that Dynevor is a great actress, but the pregnancy makes it a bit of a cheat code in rooting for her. She has to be rescued by Whitney, South Dakota, who is agoraphobic after some traumatic event involving her mother. Had the film just focused on them and cared more about the human drama, there could have really been something there. But otherwise, every other character lands with a thud. I mean, come on, how do you underutilize Djimon Hounsou? There's a real awkwardness with the interactions. Everyone just feels slightly off and the dialogue can get pretty rough. It doesn't help that everyone is such a caricature. There's no worse offender than the foster parents who are damn near cartoons, treating their kids like absolute burdens. That entire storyline could have been fun in a film that went a bit sillier, but this just cannot settle on a tone. 1 minute, they're upset about the government checks not being properly used on them. The next, there's dynamite being treated with whimsy. There are some really dumb character decisions, like, rather than using the boat they were just in, deciding to wade through the water instead. I get it, the sharks need to be able to attack, but maybe use the boat. Or the fact that one of the characters constantly gets his sweatshirt stuck to things. It all feels like bad writing. And I've grown to expect a little more from director Tommy Wirkola, so this was disappointing. As much as Thrash is a shark movie, it's never serious enough to make an impact or over the top enough to be B-movie fun. The shark effects are well done, though there is some pretty rough green screen at times. The film feels torn between something more serious and a silly one-liner comedy. Feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to truly be the shark version of Crawl. But there are worse genre films out there. It's a dumb time, but still a mostly harmless way to spend less than 90 minutes. 16th Thrash, now on Netflix, could have been titled Sharkicane, but it's clear that B-movie director Tommy Wirkola, Dead Snow, Violent Night, wants to differentiate his flick from less serious fare. Not that this disaster, shark attack hybrid thriller is particularly serious, mind you, but its tone isn't so deep in its cheek to be lumped in with the onslaught of ultra-cheap sci-fi schlock that nearly ruined the joy of a good old-fashioned chomp-chomp/bleed-bleed time-waster. Such is the conundrum of the modern shark movie, so frequently trapped between the beautifully simple thrills of Jaws and the crap CGI stupidity of two-headed shark attack. And it's okay, is it better to go cheeso campy, or hard sell poker face it for horror's sake? Unfortunately, Wirkola doesn't have a decent answer for that. The gist, if they ever considered creating a Category 6, this would be it. Such is one of the many oh shit moments in Thrash. Is this hurricane the biggest, meanest one ever? Possibly. And will its raging floodwaters sweep the biggest, meanest shark ever into the streets of a seaside town? No, because the movie doesn't feature the line, if they ever considered creating a great white, this would be it. Also, that would be overkill, and Wirkola prefers to season his conceptual silliness with shark scenarios of a, relatively, more plausible nature. Thus, we get a cadre of bitey bull sharks, the third most bitey of all species, in terms of recorded attacks, and one big mama of a great white, the first most bitey, who's pregnant for reasons that fail to lead to a payoff, but suggest, in a rather half-assed and sloppy character parallel, that one of the human protagonists, who happens to be nearly crowning as we meet her, is capable of similar ferociousness. That woman would be Lisa, Bridgerton's Phoebe Dynevor, who works at a meatpacking plant in Neville, South Carolina. She doesn't GTFO in time because her bosses made her work and now the interstate is flooded over. Same goes for her co-worker driving the tractor trailer full of beef, which will inevitably be swept away after the seawall busts and smashes the tanker open, chumming the living F out of the water mere moments after Dale, Djimon Hounsou, a shark researcher, knits his eyebrows over reports of a bull shark attack near Myrtle Beach. Right, we're deep into Aussie's territory. Dale happens to be the uncle of Dakota, Whitney Peak, an agoraphobe who kind of obliviously maybe almost thinks she'll be perfectly fine if she just sits in her living room during the storm, being sad about the death of her mother, a fact that exists because no movie in the 2020s would be greenlit without at least a trauma subplot, and as a depressed person in a trauma subplot, her home is littered with dirty dishes and garbage, although the twist is, the depressed person's requisite half-eaten boxes of Chinese takeout will soon be floating in rising waters. Meanwhile, in a plot that isn't connected to the aforementioned plots, and never will be, because this movie is so half-assed, we get a moment of actual literal half-assedness when an awful crumbum of a foster dad, Matt Nable, gets one butt cheek gnawed off by a shark. No, really, he deserves it too, neglectful as he is toward poor kids D. Elila Brown, Furiosa, Ron, Stacy Clausen, and Will, Dante Ubaldi, who find themselves stranded on a countertop as sharks poke through the kitchen, all but opening the fridge hoping to find a half-eaten Costco rotisserie chicken in there. Back in the trauma, mama plot, Lisa is trapped in her car and close to drowning, and her only hope is Dakota, who can barely set foot outside without losing her mind. By the way, did you clock the bit early in the movie in which Lisa's mom suggests she have a water birth? Of course you did, and of course you wondered if it'd be Chekhov's water birth mention, because you're a savvy and experienced movie watcher. What movies will it remind you of? Alexandria's Crawl features the same concept except with gators, and is a far tighter, better, more suspenseful watch. Thrash isn't as good as the similarly marginal On Your Paris, isn't nearly as good as the somewhat innovative Dangerous Animals, and could use a shot of Jason Statham-esque star power a la Moss spectacle. The Meg. Performance worth watching. Hounsou made a name for himself with Amistad, In America and Gladiator. One look at his recent filmography tells us it may be time for him to get a new agent. Sex and Skin, Zilch. Our take. For a movie boasting a few saucy one-liners, does this mean we have to get new foster parents? Mommy's gotta fight some fawing sharks. And a doozy of a core scenario. Once again, busted meat truck chums floodwaters. Thrash barely meets the threshold of dumb fun. Wirkola wrestles with the tone, which wavers from serious to ridiculous. Good people get eaten, which is sad, and rotten people get eaten, which is funny, but the director never marries the pathos with the camp. The film offers little incentive to be invested in the characters beyond base notions. For example, that we, as decent human beings, don't want to see children be devoured by toothy fish, whether they're teenagers or still inside their mother's wombs. One assumes the obviously tight budget left no room for a raft of mewing kitties floating in the vicinity of a dorsal fin, so we're left with a patchwork story that duct tapes the Save the Pregnant Lady plot to the Save the Foster Kids plot beneath the narrative umbrella of the big storm. These people may be miles apart, but they splash around in the same infested waters, dealing with dramatic variations of manipulative child endangerment scenarios. Is that enough to make a movie? Barely. Is the end result entertaining enough to make us forgive its flaws? Also barely. If you're feeling generous, one might logically assume that Thrash, which cycled through a few titles and trashed a theatrical release before landing at Netflix, where it probably belongs, was inspired by three things: the residual viral traces of gimmicky junk cola like Sharknado, During notably more innocent internet times, faked footage of sharks swimming through hurricane-flooded towns, and the enduring popularity of shark stuff ranging from Jaws to Shark Week and its glut of adjacent content. The movie's never more than the sum of these parts, though. Wirkola doles out snatches of gore, complete with grisly bone-snapping sound effects, inspires a small handful of half-chuckles, stages a couple of reasonably suspenseful scenes, haphazardly fiddles with irony and gives us Hounsou delivering a vaguely inspiring speech about a life-changing encounter with a hippopotamus. A dubious grab bag of amusements. Then, 17 He Netflix original film blends common disaster movie tropes with limited success. When I stumbled across the trailer for a new Netflix original film with a premise straight out of nightmares I haven't even considered before, I knew I needed to watch it. What I found was an odd blend of overstressed tropes in a film that never managed to exceed my expectations, but made for an interesting watch nonetheless. Thrash follows a small coastal town in South Carolina that gets hit by a Category 5 hurricane, completely submerging it in a flood of water. The situation the town has found itself in is very reminiscent of the damage to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, which the film obviously drew inspiration from. With the flooding and levees breaking, disaster films have been made hundreds of times before, so obviously Thrash needed a solution to set itself apart from the crowd. The answer: add a pack of ravenous bull sharks to hunt the hurricane survivors in the now submerged town. As someone who grew up living on an island and still manages to be utterly petrified of sharks, I can confidently say that I wouldn't have lasted seconds in this scenario and would have had a heart attack within moments. However, this did make for a terrifyingly addictive watch experience, as I was both cringing from the bad decisions each character made and jumping in fright every time a shark fin emerged from the murky water. Despite my clear emotional distraught of the film, Thrash was nothing extraordinary. In fact, I think several aspects of the film were executed pretty poorly, with characters I never fully connected with. Right from the start of the film, the audience is introduced to a whole cast of characters, each with their own complicated backstories and relationships. I thought this was going to be an interesting blend, but the cast remained stagnantly separate, with little interaction between them. Thrash primarily follows three groups of individuals: a protective uncle trying to save his niece, the niece herself that rescues a woman in active labor, and a group of foster kids. While there was a connection between the uncle and his niece, I felt like I was waiting for the trio of foster kids to find their place in an overarching story that never came to fruition. Even though all of the individual storylines were interesting, the audience was never left with any of them long enough. I felt like the film kept jumping back and forth between the characters too much, almost like the writers had two ideas when creating the film and decided to do both of them instead of just sticking with one. Due to this, I feel like there was some lack in character development as well, which could have been resolved if we'd spent more time with them instead of all over the place. Personally, as much as I found the foster kids' adventure compelling, I think that cutting their story entirely and focusing instead primarily on the niece and her adventures could have made for a more complete storyline with some actual fleshed-out characters. I will say, however, that one of my favorite parts of the film was when the trio of foster kids found a case of dynamite and used it to blow up the sharks hunting them. That was a pretty sick, albeit very unrealistic, scene that I thoroughly enjoyed. Also, the random insertion of a clip from Dance Moms was a jump scare more frightening than any of the sharks. Even though the cast of Thrash had to tackle both a hurricane and sharks, I will say that everything in this film was entirely avoidable. Several times during the opening scene, news and radio stations were playing messages about a mandated evacuation due to the weather conditions, and yet none of the characters took the threat seriously. One man even switched the radio from the weather to a music station, so I couldn't exactly feel bad for him when he was eaten by the group of sharks. I guess the real message here was to listen to the weather forecasters, and maybe don't ignore the mandated evacuations. Overall, to say Thrash was a good movie would be a bit of an overstatement. It was fine, but nothing extraordinary or that far out of the box. Nevertheless, I was entertained, and sometimes that's all you can hope for in a film. The Independent, student-run newsroom at the DI covers the University of Iowa and local community to keep you informed. Your support helps provide the necessary resources and training to continue our mission.